So talking about the transition into training law enforcement, or not transition, but your involvement in doing that, was that a hard thing to do? And if it was, like, why? And if it's not, how did this happen? Because again, I keep bringing this up because I'm always intrigued. I see a lot of like private citizens that do a really good job and have really quality products and services to offer. They just really struggle to break across the barrier. And it's unfortunate. I get it, as to why it's not happening in a lot of cases, but it's what I want you to share is like how you did it, so people can maybe try a different approach.
Yeah, it can be a struggle, and I like that terminology a little bit because oftentimes, as coaches or just people in this industry, we have a tendency, just like we were talking about, typecasting different martial arts. We have a tendency to typecast groups in general, and so a lot of people will go like, "Oh, no law enforcement ever wants to train, or no department will ever take me on, or I'll never get a department contract." And it's like, well, you haven't had success yet. Someone will take you in. It's there's something going on there. So yeah, long story short, it can be difficult. Now, again, I was lucky in regard to the way that I was brought up through this, because the first 5 years that I did this, I worked for somebody else. I mentioned earlier, a gentleman by the name of Mark Slane. So I was under him. And he previously had, I don't even know how many years of Taekwondo. He was a very highly competitive Taekwondo instructor. And then he was one of the first Krav Maga instructors to go through like the system when Darren Levine had brought it back. So he was like one of the first, I think, 7 black belts in Krav Maga in the United States. So like he had already been building a reputation in Columbus, Ohio, as a gym owner and as somebody that understood, at least some fighting. And then he had one of his students who became one of his black belts, was a lieutenant with one of the local police departments. So like he was already building a network and a reputation. And then I was able to come in as, I'm the guy under Mark. And now I get to meet these people kind of, through that. So my the first official law enforcement contract I ever did was with a local department about 2 hours from Columbus. I won't name any names. But the police chief there was very proactive, really enjoyed Krav Maga. He had seen pieces of it and trained pieces of it. He himself did boxing, kickboxing, and jiu-jitsu. So he was very proactive. Where you talk about hands being tied is that from a policy standpoint, he only had X amount of funding. He wasn't allowed to force his guys to train. He wasn't like any of these things. So even though he's the guy, he's still limited by, city budgets and department budgets and liability and policies and everything that goes into it. So he had brought us out. And so my first exposure to law enforcement was he knew of Ohio Krav Maga, got in touch with Mark. Mark sent me up to do the training because Mark was unable to do the training. So my first contract was handed to me, as far as that goes. Yeah, which is awesome. So there is a who you know versus what you know thing that you do have to understand. And people can get upset about that all they want, but that's just life. So get out there and network and put yourself out and talk to people and bring people in and expand who you are, or just don't complain about it. Because if you're not putting in the legwork to go meet the people that'll put you in the position and you're not talking to them the way they should or the way you should, then that's going to be problematic. It's not really, it's not them, it's you. Like if I'm talking to, the training officer, I'm going to talk to him totally different. I'm going to talk to him about the tactics in which we've got and how we can teach him how to teach his guys and how we can simplify what they're doing and how we can get their benefits. If I'm talking to the chief, I'm talking to him a little bit different about like, hey, listen, overall, we'll make this very easy to implement into your program. We can satisfy this inside of your schedules and even inside of the shift rotation in which that you work with your department. I'm talking to him about, like public, views and what they're going to see and how this training is not going to make them more aggressive and violent, but more confident in the way that they can get to train. And then if I'm talking to the city manager, I'm talking to them about like, well, if I train your guys up, that's going to lower your, situations of use of force. It's going to lower your injuries during arrests, which is going to bring down any potential for suing, any potential for any workers' comp claims. So like, I can't go to the city manager and say, let me tell you how awesome, wrestling and jiu-jitsu is for law enforcement. Like, they don't care. They care that it's going to save the city money. And I go to the police chief. He wants to know
and keep
that
you out of the press.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's just so know who you're talking to when you're talking to them and know what you need to be getting out of the people you're talking to. And that took me a long time to learn. I mean, that's not, we all make our mistakes there, but you have to play the game if you want to get in the game to be able to do that. So you have to know who you're talking to and what they need to go. So I was lucky enough early on to get, that contract was handed to me. I want to say 4 total trainings with them over the span of 2 years. I'm going to be completely honest, man. Oh gosh, and again, this is just to this group, and I know it's kind of the way it is in a lot of places. I just try not to be completely absolute about it. But man, I taught both shifts. They had 2 shifts. I taught both shifts. I had half of them the first half of the day, half of them the second half of the day. One of their guys, a couple of days before I got there, was stabbed by a drug addict and was in the hospital. 2 of the people that showed up put any effort into that in-service training. Every single one of them were just so pissed off that they had to put in 3 extra overtime hours. They were getting paid to be there, and they just didn't want to put the work in. And the really, like, that was, man, as a young instructor, that was so disappointing because I still was walking in thinking like, oh yeah, like, man, I get to work with cops. This is awesome. These are the guys I really wanted to get in and help out. And, maybe I can learn from them. And like, I had this like, I'm so green and bright eyed and I'm, 22 years old. And it's like, and then I got out there and I was like, man, I was just so bummed because they were given an opportunity. They were being paid to train. So they were getting paid to do what I love to do, which it just didn't make any sense to me. And I get it. Don't get me wrong. If you're law enforcement, listen to this. I know that there are plenty of psychological issues and time and, whatever it is and hours. But man, like, I don't know. It was like your buddy just got stabbed 3 days ago. I'm 100 at the time. I'm like 155, 160 pounds. And I'm working the big guys in here. And I'm not even good back then. You know what I mean? Like, I'm still early in what I know about like grappling and self-defense and jiu-jitsu as in general as it is. And I'm like, man, you're having trouble dealing with me at 160 pounds and your buddy just got stabbed 3 days. It just didn't make any sense. And it was very upsetting, unfortunately. But it honestly got me to realize what we talked about before, which was like, you need to meet people where they're at. Instead of walking in and forcing your expectations on them. And so I usually will spend anytime I do any training, this isn't just in-service training for departments, but anytime I do any training with a group of people that I just don't know and haven't paid their own money to be there. It's a little different when somebody pays $350 to come train with us for 2 days than it is when it's like, hey, this is a work thing, it's an in-service training, or it's a corporate training. The first hour or 2, I really just try to feel them out. I try to make things a little bit easier, a little icebreaker, and make sure that it's in there. I just want to kind of see where we're at, and then I'll meet the group where they're at. If there's 3 guys in there that I can just tell, man, these 3 want to really be here, then they're probably going to get a little more of my attention than anybody else in the class. I'll push them a little bit harder. I'll let everybody else just kind of, go through the motions, still giving them good, solid training, but I want them to be invested in it. So I try to make their experience what they want the experience to be into that regard. And I can't be emotionally invested in the fact that maybe they don't want to be there training.
Yeah, that dude.
So yeah, it's tough, man.
So many things right there. So many things.